Hello, and welcome to the SQV conversation where we honor our small, quiet voice. My name is Shannon McKeel. Pardon me. And with me today, I have Robbie Samuels, who is an amazing human. He's an author, he's an entrepreneur, he does all the things, and he's a dad. And I wanted Robbie on to talk about some of the big things he's been working on. So, Robbie Samuels, welcome to the SQV.
Thanks for having me.
It's so good to have you here. Robbie's coming at us from a suburb north of Philadelphia, and I'm sure the weather is fine. It's springtime in the United States, so we're enjoying some really good weather. So how was your Memorial Day, Robbie?
It was great. Yeah, it was a good time. Got some people together. Love being able to host and gather people.
It's wonderful. I know. I've missed those days. We're in an area now where we don't have a ton of friends. We've moved a lot. So it's good that you've got those roots and you're able to do those things with people. That's wonderful. So, Robbie, why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about you and your current pursuits?
Well, I'll just take you back to the fact that before the pandemic, I spent over a decade teaching people how to network at conferences and events. And I was really interested in building that into my own business and my own career. Half that time I was employed in a nonprofit organizing fundraising events and doing major gift work, but always on the side, I was taking some paid time off to go speak somewhere. Take a day here, day there. I thought I hit the big time when I got invited to travel from Boston to LA to do a talk. I was like, oh, this is amazing. Except I realized I didn't charge enough and it was a lot. It was a lot of travel.
It's expensive.
Yeah. So finally, I left my day job at the end of 2014 with the goal of building a speaking business and subsequently launched a podcast. Wrote my first book, which is about networking at conferences. My podcast is also about leadership networking. Then came a group coaching program. Then I hired my coach and she said, write for Harvard Business Review and do a TEDx. So I did. That was in 2019. My TEDx talk came out in January of 2020 and it was about networking in person. Well, 2 months later, no one needed to know how to network at events because we were all at home. So while I had thought that I was, poised to be an overnight success 10 years in the making, I needed to reinvent myself. And the short story is I became a virtual event design consultant and an executive Zoom producer, created a thriving new 6-figure business based on all new revenue streams in 2020. And I held my first virtual happy hour on March 13th, 2020, which was the Friday that everything kind of hit the fan and we were like, what is happening? And I was a few pages, not a whole chapter. I was a few pages ahead of the class teaching people how to use Zoom for the first few months. And then I became an expert. So my second book is how I turned my business around and how I built an audience based on, how do you sort of identify and discover likely prospects and referral partners within your existing network. And my third book finally came out in March 13th, 2023. And it's a book about how to use Zoom to really leverage the experience of being able to bring people together virtually. And how I think it can be relevant to your audience is that I have a client who has a CEO summit that happens 4 times a year. And the last one had a panel where they were talking about, and these are like top, 50 sometime. I mean, this is like high brand recognition CEOs on a panel together virtually talking about why everyone needs to come back to the office. Well, there's no way to build culture. There's no way to build community. And I'm thinking, all I've done for 4 years was build culture and community. Like there are people I am so close to because I've been able to see them over and over and over again, the frequency of connection, all virtual. So I just, I've been able to sort of figure out what I didn't understand that first few days of the pandemic. I was like, well, events are about content and connection. How are we going to do that on, a webinar? So I figured out lots of things, including not to call them a webinar. And then because all 3 of my books had really strong launches with lots of reviews, over 200 reviews for each book, and I'm an indie author, not with a huge list, I'm now a book launch strategist. And a big secret to my success of turning my business around is I'm a business growth strategy coach. And I was able to apply the same feedback I would give a client and then use that in my own business. So I am, in short, a multi-passionate entrepreneur. And I have 2 main focuses in my business now: the virtual event, whether that's designing coaching clients like speakers on how to do better, or actually producing the events and emceeing the events. And then there's the side of my business that's more about coaching entrepreneurs and specifically authors around how to leverage books into their next offer, or just anyone about how to the same skills apply to salespeople or anyone who's got a message. How do you sort of lean into the existing network that you have and use that to take your message forward?
It's all about connecting with the right people at the right time, and then also listening to them and figuring out how they can add joy and goodness to your business, and then how you can help them. And that's what networking is all about. So I've been networking really heavily. I consider myself a super connector because I have so many people now that I can refer out. And so for my company, it's been really good because people are like, what does a super connector mean? And we know that term because we're both doing it, but we can put people together that are meaningful. And I've been doing that for a long time as well. I've actually set a few people up. I've been a matchmaker too. It's part of the super connector vibe. So this is all super interesting to me. And I've written down so much that I wanted to talk to you about. So let's talk a little bit about how your strategies could help a leader. We know that networking is time consuming. We know that people, maybe they want to be in the office, maybe they want to be at a meeting. So if you were a CEO or an HR manager, what type of networking strategies would you, and like the frequency, and like where would you send them?
Well, something to keep in mind is that attending any new space, let's say it's an association conference or a local chapter meeting, the first visit, you're a first timer and it's going to be kind of awkward. You can do some advanced planning. My favorite time that I did, I could just think of one I did a few years ago. I really wanted to break into this association that worked with event managers. So I found somebody who was involved. They introduced me to a board member who organizes their newsletter. I offered to share some content for them to put in a newsletter. That board member was grateful because they're a volunteer having to pull together materials every month. And I was like, oh, I'll give you a blog post that you can just repurpose. That's fine. So I show up to my first meeting. I find that board member. She introduces me to another board member. I take selfies with every board member I can find. And I'm not usually that person. A month later, I'm about to go to the next meeting. I had meanwhile connected on Facebook and LinkedIn with as many people as I could. So I did a post. I posted all the selfies talking about how I was really looking forward to seeing. And I listed the 5 or 6 people that I was looking forward to seeing and tagged them. And when I walked in, they were like, Robbie. And then I also put another article in the newsletter. So I was able to talk to the whole room and say, oh, did you see last month's newsletter? Oh, and one came out yesterday, actually. And I referenced it. So it's about really showing up. So you have to, it's like intensive networking versus scattershot. Go at least 3 times in a row. So if it's monthly, that would be 3 monthly meetings. Mm-hmm. The same effort would be required to go 3 times over 12 months. But if you go scattershot every 4 or 5 months, people aren't going to remember you. You're always going to be the new person walking in. And if you go 3 times and really show up and help set up and help clean up and talk to people, whatever your goals are, make sure you really meet them. And if you're a little lower energy, or you're an introvert, or it takes more out of you to be around people, then your goals are going to be different than mine. And that's okay. But make sure you meet your goals for those 3 visits. Magically, if you aren't there the 4th time, your name may still come up.
That's great. It's great advice. So I've noticed in my business, in my development, I got pulled into a BNI really early on. And for me, because my audience is CEOs and HR managers, that really wasn't a good fit for me. But I have made some good friendships, and it was useful for me to be friends with those people because they're very well connected in the community. So what I did is, kind of change my strategy. I was like, I'll go to BNIs and sub every once in a while, but I'm not joining. I want those friendships, and I want people to know that I'm not because I was was basically, I moved here during the pandemic. And so this area, I didn't know anybody. And so I'm like this alien. They don't know who I am. They don't trust me. So I built up my friendship rapport and people that, wanted to at least follow me on social media. And that was enough for me to kind of feel more confident that I could go out into these CEO realms and go to these high level, social clubs and kind of canoodle with these guys that could potentially be my decision makers and my clients. So that was kind of the change that I had to make. And you have to be investing your time in groups that really fit your needs, right?
Yeah, and there are different reasons to go out and network. I mean, you named a couple of them just now, and I'll just be a little more explicit. Sometimes finding accountability partners is a reason to go out because you've got some big projects ahead that you really want to focus on. And it's nice to know other people who are doing similar work or at least similar intensity of work. So maybe you're working on a book and they've got a big project at work. Still, you're both going to talk to each other every week and check in. Sometimes you're just trying to find professional connections in a certain region because you're just trying to get to know the lay of the land. And that's why you're showing up. I went out to an event yesterday for podcast hosts that was based in Philadelphia. I went for 90 minutes, took me a while to drive there and back. It was a commitment, but I was like, oh, I want to meet a handful of people who are doing this kind of work. It could be interesting. But the other thing is making sure you're splitting your time between where your clients are and where your peers are. So if you're a lawyer and you hang out always with lawyers, you're not going to find business that way. But if you're a lawyer who likes hanging out with creatives and you spend a lot of time around creative people and you become known as the lawyer in that space, whenever someone's got a legal question, they're going to bring your name up. So it's just figuring out why you're going. And if you're doing some kind of sales thing, whether it's direct marketing or, you're just trying to better understand employee engagement tactics, sometimes it's important to go where you can learn something. So I think for a lot of HR managers and HR leaders, people leaders, it's really good to just think about going to spaces like a conference. It's not just about the content. The content's the initial draw. You're like, oh, should I go to this SHRM event? Well, yeah, they're going to have these amazing speakers and the breakouts are going to be great. And I need to learn these things. But we also go to these events for the people, for the connections. And before the pandemic, I spent all this time trying to teach people how to make the most of going to these events. We make the effort to actually get on a plane sometimes, right? Planes, trains, and automobiles to get to a venue. Here are some strategies to make sure you make the most of it. That was something I was focusing on. But I think even more so that's important now because we're all kind of out of practice when it comes to networking in person. But I'll just end with this last point, Shannon. I think the 1-2 punch is the fact that we can now go back to in person, which is great. But the follow-up and the reconnecting on Zoom or some other virtual platform, that's key. It used to be you'd meet at a conference and not see anyone for a year. And then you'd feel like you're starting all over again.
Yeah. And social media helps with that too.
You can really stay connected, whether it's one-on-one or you invite a group of people together to catch up, or you say, let's all talk about our notes 6 weeks from the conference and see how people are doing with the progress they said they were going to make. You could have mini masterminds that pop up around an event that sort of meet a little bit right after. But then you can reconnect right before the next one. So there's just a lot more we can do that makes it easy. Geographically disparate people can stay connected just a lot easier than it used to be.
It's beautiful. I really love that. That's a great point. I just wrote down there's a conference coming up in Orlando this August, and I'm like, I've got to go to that. It's important. It's the SHRM event. So I love the idea of doing a mini mastermind around an event too, because there's going to be those Slack times where you might have a little social. You can meet for lunch and kind of talk about things and figure out how you can network and help each other out. That's a great idea. Thanks for bringing that up. Something that I've used in my business are Facebook groups too. I have one Facebook group that is focused on feminism and strengthening our female bonds and working together as women. And then I have another one that's really an advocacy for workplace environment culture changes. I'm calling that Ma Jones for Work. I dedicated my book to Mother Jones, who was a workers' rights advocate about 100 years ago. So I'm kind of picking up her baton. I don't know where that's going to go, but I'd love to go testify at Congress. So let's see, maybe that'll happen. But so we were talking about COVID-19, and I know that was horrible for so many reasons. But I think that what you're talking about is the one good thing that came out of COVID was our ability to connect virtually. So I don't know if you want to circle back and kind of talk about that a little bit more, but yeah, I don't know. Is that something you want to talk about?
Well, when the pandemic started, I had, just spent 10 plus years teaching people how to make the most of these in-person opportunities, because I believe strongly that events were about both content and connection. I mean, even before the pandemic, we could stay home and get amazing content from the comfort of our home. We didn't have to leave the house, right? There were webinars and there was podcasts, there were master classes, there were even books. Books have been around for a very long time. So when Zoom and all these other things sort of popped up, it was like, well, how can we make virtual not an exception to this rule? And that really stymied me. Now I feel like I've cracked the code, which is why my third book, heaven forbid, I write a fourth book soon. I accidentally wrote 2 in 17 months. So my third book is called Break Out of Boredom, Low-Tech Solutions for Highly Engaging Zoom Events. And I feel like people in the workplace could read this and get a lot out of it. The first chapter I wrote was one around breakout rooms, and I ended up writing 10,000 words on breakout rooms out of the book's over 64,000 words. So I have a lot to say on this topic, and I think that with a combination of quality design, understanding what virtual facilitation should look like, and knowing the platform that you're using, that will lead to some incredible outcomes. And this is what I do. I design the experience based on the outcomes that my clients tell me they want people to have. So I always say, well, who are you trying to attract into the session? What are they thinking, feeling, and are doing at the end of your session? What are they now thinking, feeling, and hopefully ready to do? And that's the transformation. These are the objectives. Let's design with that in mind. And I think what happens is people were just almost just like, oh, I just learned about this tool. Let's try it. And I'm like, how does it fit with the plan? Don't just be stardust. Like it has to have some realness to it. So when I say low tech solutions, I tend to work with the tools that are features built into Zoom. So more people will participate. You'll get over 90% of people responding, for instance, to a Zoom poll. But if you send to them through a third-party tool, it might be somewhere between 25 and 50%. So it looks cool. It's nice graphics, but if it's about engagement, then we really need to think about the audience that we have and whether they're technically inclined. Here's a little funny story for you. I discovered why people weren't following those third-party links in chat. Zoom is full screen when you first get in it. If you haven't learned how to change that setting, when you click the link in the chat, your browser window suddenly takes over your screen and Zoom goes away. And so people were trained to not click links in chat for fear of not knowing how to get back to the Zoom window. So trainers were like, oh, this is simple. I'll just drop a link to this, this, or this. And then that's why they were getting low engagement, was because their audience literally were like, I don't trust those things because then I lose the Zoom window. I don't know what happened to it. Yeah. So I had to figure out like what was going on in the audience's mind and how can we design for that and get the outcome we're looking for. I think this can also apply for hybrid meetings, for people who are working remote. I have a client who has a CEO summit 4 times a year, and I know they had, this is amazing to listen to what CEOs talk about, but some of them were like, oh, we have to bring people back to the office because we can't create culture remote. And I'm like, all I do is create culture remotely. And there were people working remote way before the pandemic. Like, this is not a new idea for a lot of industries, but how do we show people, demonstrate for people how to create those spaces? And it's sort of like a meeting. A meeting can happen where we all just show up and we figure it out, or a meeting can have an agenda. No one's going to complain if there's an agenda, but some people won't be able to fully participate without one. And if an agenda can be given to everyone in advance, more people will feel able to fully participate. If there's clear rules of how decisions get made, more people can fully, no one is going to complain when there are good structures in place, but the lack of them enables some people to shine and others don't. Mm-hmm. And I think it's similar when you're on a Zoom call and you're trying to bring your team together, having rules to the road, understanding like this is how we engage for these kinds of meetings. This is how we're going to use the chat. This is how we're going to have our cameras. This is how we're going to get into small groups to talk about things and then bring ideas back to the full room. If you have that mindset of being creative and playful with what you're trying to do, it just works so much better. Last thought, we cannot use the rules of hockey when we're playing soccer or vice versa. I feel like we were like, oh, these are the same things. We just do exactly what we did in person, but now online. And I'm like, no. They're yeah, okay, I can see how they both have goals, right? And they both have a field. Yep, and people kind of are on them. Yeah, and there's defense, offense, true. But like, okay, they're not the same thing though. And anyone who knows either sport will concur. So why do we think that an in-person gathering and a virtual gathering are going to be the same? So we need slightly different rules apply.
Yeah, and I feel like this is perfect. You just teed me up for my next comment, because when I was a multifamily marketing director and I lived in a different community, I actually had moved, and my boss wasn't really thrilled about it, but she kept me on. So I had been doing remote work through the fall of 2019. I had to stay home with my son who had a surgery. So I had to stay home with him. So I was their first remote employee. I was kind of their test case. And then everybody went home. And so they kind of used what they had learned with me, and they kind of set up the same type of rules with other people as well as they could, because other people had different departments and different things they were doing. But we were all home for 6 months because we thought we were going to die. So they were trying to bring people back to the office as soon as possible. And they, my company did, or actually to their credit, they did a pretty good job of keeping people safe at the property level, at the apartment communities, and at the corporate office. But there were many people that told me, because I was always an empathetic coworker, they would say, I don't want to come back to work. I want to stay home. I'm more productive there, and my life is better when I'm at home. So my CEO had a really hard time with me staying on. I ended up working remotely for almost 3 years, and that was not her preference. And I think that was a big part about why, they treated me so bad, because they just really wanted me back in the office because that was their business structure. So I'm wondering, if you were going to work with a company like that and you were going to say, you know what, we want to make sure that you're really comfortable on Zoom, because she was not. We had our Monday morning meetings on Zoom. People loved it during COVID. And they continue to do it because they wanted some people because they had outgrown some of their business spaces. And so a lot of their regional managers were working from home and then just out in the field. They would come together at a conference, at the conference table once a week or something, but they didn't have offices. They had outgrown their place. So it worked out well for those folks. But there was a lot of people that would have rather just stayed home and worked, and they were better at it, and they would have had a better quality of life. But these bosses were really apt to bring them back in the office because they were afraid of these new challenges, right? Zoom has challenges, accountability. There's all these things that come into play when somebody's working outside of the office. So can you talk a little bit about how you've worked with CEOs and leaders and companies to try to show them that this is as good of a way, if not a better way? I think it's kind of better. And then what is your experience with hybrid workplaces? So my son is, he lives out in Boston. He works for a larger company, and he goes to work 2 days a week. And from what I've seen, the data shows that's better for employee mental health. It's better for families. It's cheaper. They don't have to spend as much gas, buy as much clothes. For women, we don't have to buy as many cosmetics. It just works out. So can you talk a little bit about that?
So, I've been seeing more and more conversations about this topic happening the last couple of years. I'm so grateful for it because it feels like an inclusive conversation. It's not about remote or hybrid. It's about hiring the right people for the job and then figuring out, well, how do you engage the employees that you have? So let's start with the first one, trust. If you hire the right people and they're professionals and they're getting the job done, truthfully, most of us can get a job done in about 4 hours of actual work time in any 8-hour day.
Yeah.
The reason we spend more time is because we are at work.
Mm-hmm.
We're having some social time. We're getting a little distracted. We're doing a little shopping online. We're taking an extra long lunch to run an errands. We're getting caught in the hallway by someone who wants to ask us a question that's not actually relevant to our direct project, but we still think we should probably take the 20 minutes to address it, right? So the actual work that we have to get done can be done in 3.5, 4 hours, probably in a day. So when you're remote, a lot of those distractions are just eliminated. you are still available during certain office hours, which should be set and agreed upon by the staff, so that people can ping you through Slack or text and ask you to hop on a phone call or hop on Slack or hop on a digital call of some kind. It is important that people overlap certain hours of the day. I mean, this is also taking into consideration time zone differences. So to make sure that there's always somebody else around and no one's working overnight when everyone else is working during the day. Like, that feels too disparate for building kind of good culture. But if you have people, if more than one person's working overnight, then that could work because it's your overnight, but it's their daytime because they're on the other side of the world, right? So it also makes for more happy, productive employees when they have the ability to take the time to take care of a kid, take care of a parent. I have a friend that I want to mention here. Her name is Claire Kumar, and Claire talks about how this is about inclusivity, that it's about allowing space for people. And she just had a post today I saw on LinkedIn talking about how remote work is often not about the employee, but about who the employee is caring for. That it's about needing to be flexible in order to meet the needs of a family member that they're taking care of. So flexibility is inclusivity is one of her key phrases. And, my wife works remote and has since the beginning of the pandemic. Even before that, it was mostly remote. And she travels to see clients. She travels to go to conferences to see her colleagues. And she works way more hours than she needs to, right? Like she pours herself into this job. And it's like she's going to get the job done, but she also has a flexible morning, right? To get her workout in, to get her kids off to school, to run and do another appointment. And then she gets all of her work done. If she has to work a little bit after dinner, she does work a little bit after dinner. Like, she is being treated as an adult. So I think some of the missing pieces is that culture doesn't happen spontaneously, even in person. So people who thought you could just take a whole bunch of people and throw them into a room and call it networking were missing the point. And those spaces always favored certain people. I happen to be an outgoing extrovert, so I can navigate those like unstructured spaces, but they don't work well for lots of other people. And now that we're having a better understanding of neurodiversity, that's a key piece of this conversation, because there are people who are brilliant at their jobs, but maybe they're highly sensitive and the overhead lighting is just killing them. Maybe socializing, which is the way we network at, in our offices, they have social anxiety. It's not going to work for them. They need to be excused from those norms, and they will be an excellent employee. They will work well one-on-one. People can meet with them. They're not being standoffish. It's a mental health issue. If we recognize the diversity of the people in our workspaces, we can design the experience and be flexible, and they will be excellent, and they won't leave. They won't vote with their feet to go find another place that will accommodate them. And it's not about ping pong tables and climbing walls and, beanbag chairs. It's about allowing people this space to grow. Funny thought is, the movie 9 to 5 had split schedules. If you remember that movie, it's in the 70s, the movie ends with one woman saying goodbye while another woman takes the seat. They were sharing a desk because they each had family issues that they needed to be available for. And so it's not like a new concept to be thoughtful and design the experience to really meet our employees where they are.
That's so good. I thank you for all of that. It's good insight. Yeah, I think that, my company wanted to do more of that, but they were afraid. The HR manager was overwhelmed, and she didn't really have enough gravitas or enough experience to actually speak up on behalf of her employees, that she was supposed to be representing. So that was a challenge there as well. But I think, there's a lot of, I've experienced this, I'm sure you have too. There's a lot of people that are afraid of change, especially in leadership positions, and that creates a lot of cultural deficits. And so, what we do as consultants is we go in and we say, this is how we can help. And these are the tools that we use. And if you want to partner with us, that's fine. And there's always a return on investment. We have to prove that. If we're smart, we go and talk to somebody, we're like, well, we can save you 25% based on the solution. So, it's not a hard thing necessarily to to get beyond. But there was something else that we were talking about. I really wanted to talk to you about this because this is just exciting to me. So tell us, Robbie, how you went from 0 to 6 figures in 8 months.
Yeah. So just to close out that last conversation, I wanted to say the importance of hiring good consultants who can bring innovative ideas to a company and guide you through the process of change. Because change is difficult, but change management specialists exist for a reason. So don't just feel like you have to figure this out on your own. You can look at other companies. You can hire the people who understand this. That's not what I do, but I understand the value of bringing those people in. So when the pandemic shuttered my existing business, which was, poised to be an overnight success, 10 years in the making, I had to really figure out how else I could show up and offer value. And I wrote a blog post on March 12th, 2020 called 9 Ways to Network in a Pandemic. I got there very quickly because on March 9th, 2020, I kind of accepted that change was coming. I didn't resist it. I was like, oh, okay. All the things I thought I was doing this year are going to be gone, like postponed, who knows to when. But I accepted it. I'd been paying attention to Rachel Maddow. She had been tracking this since December. I had been hearing her talk about it. It was over there, right? It was in the other part of the world. We suddenly realized how small the globe was. Suddenly it was here. It was in Seattle, and I was like, well, that's here, right? Like that's a minute from now. And so I accepted that. And March 11th, 2020, I met with my peer mastermind, which is why it's so amazing to have people who get you. And one of them just sort of said, Robbie, you don't think of networking as something you only do in person. You've built a global network. Why don't you go help people do that? And it put me in the mindset of service. If you ever get into a deep funk, the best thing you can do is figure out how to help somebody else, because that makes it not about you and your deep funk. So the next day I was like, all right, what could I do? I can write a blog post article about networking. So that's what I did at 9 Ways to Network in a Pandemic. And number 3 was to host a virtual happy hour. I love hosting dinners at conferences. I always host meals and drinks and gatherings. I've even done that for conferences that I wasn't attending, but were in my local area. If I know some speakers, we'll organize some speakers and their friends to come together. I love convening people. Events have been part of my blood for a long time. So that night, March 12th, 2020, 8 p.m. Eastern, I'm like, I should do one of these. I'm looking at the list and I'm like, all right, I'll do this. I'll do the virtual happy hour. I write a note in a private Facebook group that I'm a part of filled with coaches and consultants and entrepreneurs. Hey, if I host something tomorrow at 5 Eastern, would you come? Got a few quick yeses, and then spent the next day promoting it out into the internet, sending emails left and right to people. 25 people came.
Yay!
About 25 people came. We had an hour. We went around from person to person. Everyone basically had their 3 minutes. It was kind of the way it worked. But I understood a few things about facilitation that I had not appreciated. I have been trained on how to run virtual masterminds. So virtual masterminds are spaces where there's a facilitator and the other people are there to each share a question or a challenge, and then you facilitate other people giving feedback. It goes back to Benjamin Franklin. It's a very old idea. But now I was taught about how to do this virtually and how to watch facial expressions to know when people are upset or need a moment or are thinking about raising their hands. Like, how do you bring people in? So I had all this training on how to do that, paying attention, which is interesting because what I heard from everyone early in the pandemic was, I can't see body language. I'm like, I literally spent weeks being trained on seeing body language. Like the assumption was there is body language. And now everyone's like, I can't see anything. I'm like, whoa, I know something that other people don't know. So I also called on people in a sense. Here's a simple trick. I call it on deck. So it would be like, hey, we're going to go alphabetically for each person to sort of check in. We're going to start with Amy and then go to Ben. Amy, go ahead. I'm going to demonstrate for you, Amy, what I want you to say. Say the prompts, give my answer. All right, Amy, it's your turn again. After Amy, it's going to be Ben. Oh, thank you so much, Amy. That was great. Ben, your turn. After Ben, it's going to be Christopher. Thank you so much, Ben. Christopher, after you, it's going to be David, right? And you just And then the person who's about to go is ready to unmute. They know it's their turn. If they weren't paying attention, they look to see what was the other person doing. If people need a reset with the instructions, every few people, you might say, hey, just remember, it's 30 seconds, like just to stop that. Because if you end up with one person doing 3 minutes and another person does 3 minutes, and then on the third person, you interrupt them, they're going to be mad that you interrupted them because they did what the last 2 people did. So how could it be their fault, right? So all these little facilitation techniques I had understood. So I hosted virtual happy hours weekly, started getting on calls, a ton of people. I was coaching at the time about a dozen entrepreneurs a week on behalf of a company. And that company asked me to take on a cohort of students who were learning. It was a course on how to launch an online course, which is a very like meta concept. And they're like, it's a part-time role. And I'm like, I don't have a job, right? Like my business is closed. Like, sure. So I was doing coaching with them. They gave me 120 students. I will just tell you now, 120 students is not a part-time role.
No.
So I had just tons of data. The moment was that my like extrovert brain was like, oh my God, I love meeting with people. Sure, I'll hop on a call with you. Sure, you can pick my brain. Sure, I'll meet with your team. Oh, yeah. Sure. And then I thought, I would never tell a coaching client, just fill their calendar with social calls. I would tell them to do research calls. Now, normally when you're doing research calls, you have to go find people to meet with. You have to go and ask people to meet with you. In this case, people were coming to me, but I framed the call as a research call. And April 14th, 2020, I announced the pilot of a 4-week training program that was going to help people become more confident and competent using Zoom. I filled that with 15 people. It was $500 a piece. It was just like a really easy ask. I ran that 4 months in a row. By the 3rd month, it was a certification program. The price went up the whole time. And by the summer, companies were starting to reach out to me. Some organizations, I heard from Association of Talent Development, for instance, California WIC Association, which became a client of mine today. I met over that year someone from Feeding America, which is one of the largest nonprofits in the US. They help with food insecurity, supporting food banks. So I had these companies, these larger organizations and nonprofits reaching out to me, and I started figuring out how to help them design things that fall. I worked every day from April until November, except for Father's Day and US Thanksgiving. I always joke that US Thanksgiving doesn't count because I said I work every day that ends in Y, and Thanksgiving doesn't. But the only thing that made me know the passage of time was happening was this Friday event that I hosted. So that virtual happy hour on a Friday at 5 Eastern, which, by the way, that wasn't market research to figure out when to host it. It was, I had the idea at 8 o'clock Eastern, and the next logical time to have a happy hour was 5 the next day. I ended up with people from 34 countries attending this virtual event over the next 2 years. People were getting up at like 4:30 in the morning in the US, in Australia, 6 o'clock, middle of the night. People were staying up in Germany to be on the call. It was wild. We did Christmas and we did New Year's together because they were both on Fridays in 2020. It was free, a free event, weekly for 2 years, monthly for a little more than 2 years, and then I just sunset it. But that base, that gave me the confidence. I tested ideas out. I'll tell you, at the beginning of this call, I told you I was a few pages ahead. I would ask people to write their Zoom questions in the chat and send them to a breakout room for 10 minutes so they can get to know each other. While they were in the room, I would Google, YouTube, and go onto the Zoom website to get answers to their questions. They'd come back and I'd say, here's like an overview of an answer for you, but if you want to dig a little bit deeper, here are a couple of links you can check out. And I just did that until I knew the answers to all the questions they were asking me off the fly. Like I very quickly knew how to answer lots of things. But that was my education those first few months, was just staying on top of it with people.
Yeah, that's amazing. The riches are in the niches. You had set yourself up for this opportunity, and then COVID gave it to you. And I think it's just brilliant that you're able to make something positive out of something that was so very negative for so many people. So I was a member of the multifamily huddle, and we met every other week on a Friday, I think. And Jamin Harkness is a innovator in the multifamily space, and it was a beautiful scenario. And we had a lot of ideas to share, right? How are we instituting these new policies and these new safety precautions across our industries? Are you making people come back to the office, or what are you doing? Are you having them test? There's so many things that in our industry we needed answers for, and Jamin really filled that void. And I'll always be thankful he had me speak, because we did a lot of signs. There's a lot of new signs that needed to be developed, and we talked about, some of those things that our company was quick to know that we needed in order to protect our residents. So there was so many different aspects of the business, and we talked about all of that. So I'm wondering, I'm gonna have you talk about your business so people can get a hold of you. But I'm just wondering, a real quick question: during those happy hours that you hosted, was it just a networking event, or was there a topic? Were people sharing what's happening in their family, or were they sharing things that are happening with their companies, or what was the topic matter? What did you guys discuss?
So every other week, I had a guest come on and do about a 20-minute talk. We did always start at breakout rooms where people get into rooms for 6 minutes and just share wins, a personal win and a professional win. So it's groups of 3 for 6 minutes. So really quick touch base, whether they already know each other well or it's a new person. It's an easy question for people to have an answer for. It gives you some insight about what's important to them. Come back, have a few people get nominated in chat to share a win. We'd hear from 3 or 4 people so we can all hoot and holler. It's amazing how much hooting and hollering you can do even when everyone's muted. So I show people how to be highly engaged. And then we'd have the guest, or I would send them to another breakout room with a question. And then the third breakout room, even before it was simple, we had found a way around getting people to be able to move between breakout rooms. So now it's a really easy thing to do, but we basically set up 10 different topics and allowed people to move from room to room to find whatever they wanted to talk about, so that they could find either someone with a similar identity or similar challenge or similar interest, and then find connection. And then, the voting with your feet, click a mouse and move from one room to the other if you're not finding what you need yet. And then we'd stay after, and I would just do questions for 30, 40 minutes, 5 minutes, just open the floor up. I still host a Friday mastermind every single week where we bring together striving and thriving 6-figure entrepreneurs. We similarly do a little update from me. We do the wins, and then we open the floor and see what people want to talk about, sort of our mastermind style. I also host a co-working every week for that group, which is where people get on Zoom, which is another way of using Zoom. Is people have, they come on, they take maybe up to 5 minutes saying, this is what I'm working on during these 2 hours. And then you set like a 35-minute, 25 or 30-minute timer. This timer is built to Zoom now. And everyone can turn off their cameras if they want. You focus on your work for 25 or 35 minutes. The bell rings, you come back, you look at each other, you say, yep, I got a little bit done. Oh, I got a little distracted. I got to reset. And then you do another 25 or 35 minutes. And then like 35 minutes is basically 2 hours. But it's real focused time on getting things done on your calendar. So my wife actually runs one of those for her colleagues. She saw what I was doing, and it's another way of giving back something for your clients. I mean, your employees. They need that time to focus. And if any 2 employees have a question, she just opens up the breakout room so they can go and hop into a room if they want to, if they have like something they want to dig into for a little bit, or they have a sidebar chat going in Slack or something like that. So
I think that all sounds really good, and it sounds very daunting for someone that's not a Zoom professional. So if somebody wants to contact you and learn how to do these strategies, or maybe you can host a virtual event for them,
I would totally love to.
Yeah. How can they reach out to you, Robbie?
So Robbie at robbiesamuels.com would be an email. robbiesamuels.com is where you'll learn about everything I do. I'm a multi-passionate entrepreneur, but one site is all the things, including my new Biz Book Publishing Hub, which helps authors find the experts they need to write, edit, publish, and market a book. It's all there. I would love to connect also on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find. And I design and produce virtual events. I do employee engagement events, which is something I was doing a lot of early on. I do virtual holiday parties. I've had a lot of HR folks reach out to me to do a virtual holiday party because they have people in and out of the office. I know how to make a really fun, high energy virtual gathering. I basically MC the experience, but I also handle all the tech, to lower your stress and allow you to focus on your goals and your participants' goals for the event.
I love it. I'm going to use you for my clients. I think that is a great way to do it. And it's, I think there's a beautiful thing about being in person that you can hug a person. That's a great thing. You can, kind of get a better vibe, but I think that you can get almost there with a virtual event. It just have to be administered properly. So that's a beautiful service that you offer. So thank you for telling our viewers more about that. Before we get off the call, Robbie, is there anything else that you would like to discuss or any last moments that thoughts?
For anyone who's interested, there's some resources on my website, but you can go directly to breakoutofboredom.com and you will find all kinds of resources related to my third book, which is all about leveraging Zoom. So if you want to practice this on your own, there are checklists and step-by-step guides and video tutorials and a sample run of show. And there's a lot of information that you can just use to even improve your weekly team meeting, for instance. Something that I think sometimes training, which is something else I brought in to do, is I will train your assistants to run your meetings better, to understand when to spotlight people, which recording features they want to turn on or off, how to make them more secure, how to help people stop interrupting you by having their mic unmuted in unexpected ways and poor timing. So, I can come in for an hour and just train some team members, but having the book is a little bit of a resource guide ongoing. And there's just a lot of data that it's everything I knew for 3 years captured into one book.
It's brilliant. I appreciate that resource, and I'm sure people are going to be buying up that book. That sounds like a really wonderful thing. So, Robbie, thank you so much for being on the SQV today. I think that, we did really circle back to empathy, and that's really always the goal, because you have to have systems in place that honor humans. And when you're able to give them an opportunity to be home more, that's super empathetic. So I appreciate you.
My pleasure.
Namaste.